Hello, and welcome to the Mr. Foveon YouTube channel. Today, I have here a Sigma SD Quattro. No, not the bigger sensored SD Quattro H, just the regular one. And I got a pretty okay deal on it. It wasn't a crazy amount below the normal asking price, but a reasonable amount. At any rate, I've always wanted to try this camera. I've had older Foveon cameras in the past, but they're the real old ones. Think the SD14. And that was a real long time ago. I barely remember it. And I wanted to get just the regular SD Quattro because I wasn't sure if it was going to be a camera that I actually wanted to use and keep using. I wasn't sure if I was going to like this new Foveon camera. But let's answer that question right now. I personally do. I think it's a generally awesome camera, and it does what I want it to do. Keep that in mind, and keep in mind that I'm just a random person that likes cameras. I don't do sports or do this stuff for a living. I'm here to have some fun. So, yeah, this camera, for me, it's fun. That being said, would I recommend this? I don't know. Again, I love it, and I kind of now want the H, but it's not, I don't think it's something I'd recommend, which we'll get into at the end of the video. At any rate, on a slightly tangential thing, did you know Sigma has reaffirmed that the full-frame Foveon is still in the works? There's still hope for a new Foveon camera. But who knows when that'll actually come. Until then, we got this. Now, you might have figured by checking the runtime of this video, it's very long. I recommend you pause the video, get a snack, get a drink, and then buckle up, especially if you're here for the long haul. And with that, let's actually have a look at the SD Quattro. What is the SD Quattro? Well, the Sigma SD Quattro is this camera here, a mirrorless camera. It was announced in February of 2016. It comes in featuring an APS-C sensor, a Foveon APS-C sensor, which is a CMOS, by the way. This has the following figures. There are 3 layers to the sensor. The top layer is 19 megapixels. It's most sensitive to blue. The second layer is 4.9 megapixels, and it's most sensitive to green. And lastly, the third layer is 4.9 megapixels, and it's most sensitive to red. This gives us a total pixel count of 29 megapixels and a spatial resolution of 19 megapixels, meaning the images out of here are 19 megapixels. But they have extra color resolution, hence those 2 other layers. Sigma claims that this is equivalent to a 40 megapixel APS-C camera. Anyways, we'll get into some of the details later on. For now, more camera details. The SD Quattro obviously has no color filter array, no Bayer filter. Or if you remember older cameras, no CMY filter either. Also no X-Trans, just no filter. There's also no anti-aliasing filter. And the camera has a removable IR filter, which is very neat. The features that this camera has additionally are that it uses a Sigma SA mount, although I don't know if I'll call that a feature. It's oddly enough the same flange distance as their SLR and DSLR cameras, which kind of explains its look. The ISO range of the SD Quattro is 100 to a very, very optimistic 6400. The SD Quattro has a shutter range of 30 seconds to 1/4000th of a second, and the bulb mode will only really let you go for 120 seconds. The flash sync speed is 1/180th of a second. The camera can shoot at 3.6 frames per second at full resolution. for about 14 shots. That's then when the buffer typically fills. At lower image sizes, you can do 5.1 FPS for up to 28 photos. Wow. To back up this phenomenal speed, you get a hybrid phase and contrast detect system, and it offers up nine hole focus points. Jiminy Cricket. That's cute. Ugh, yeah, 9. Cute might not be the right word. At any rate, the camera, as I said, is mirrorless, so obviously it features an EVF, and it's over here. It is a 2.36 milli dot unit. Additionally, the rear panel features a 3-inch 1.62 milli dot unit. It is not a touch though. And you might have noticed right beside the color panel, you have a integrated sub-display right there. And I know, this is basically a normal sub-display, but I really like the way this one looks. Look at that. That's pretty cool, right? At any rate, moving on, the memory on this camera is SD cards, and it's powered by Sigma's BP61, and I'll actually get back to that. Without batteries or memory, the stated weight figure of this camera is 625 grams. So it's not super light. When this camera was released, the SD Quattro came in at a very reasonable $799, USD of course. In now dollars, that's around 1,088 USD, or around 1,492 Maple Leaf buckaroos. A very reasonable price. Foveon. What is that? Well, this is going to be a brief description and a contextualization of the Foveon sensor. I actually want to talk more about this sensor / these set of sensors because I personally think it's very neat. But honestly, this video is already very long, and if I added in a full dive into Foveon, this might become a 3 to 50,000 hour video. So I'll save that for another video. So let's start off with regular sensors. Most sensors, CCD or CMOS, are kind of interesting. They actually don't see color on their own. They just see intensities of light. So how do we make them color up, see the rainbow, if you will? Well, normally the pixels individually will have filters applied over top of each pixel, and they're typically arranged in a 4-pixel pattern, and it allows typically 1 pixel to see red, 1 pixel to see blue, and 2 to see green. That is the typical pixel or arrangement for a set of 4 pixels. That's normally called the Bayer filter array. That's what we normally find in most cameras available today. So what this means is that at each photo site, it really only sees one color with whatever filter array is on top of that photo site at that time, which is only one. Typically, you would like to at least have RGB to mix to get your whole gamut of colors. And I can confirm 1 is less than 3. That's a fact. So in order to actually build an image with the data off these sensors, you actually just need a lot of math. And you use that math to figure out and infer what those colors should actually be on that photo site, the colors that are not recorded. That's generally the short story. In reality, what it really means is that a lot of the information in an image that you get from regular sensors are an approximation. And this does lead to some different issues. 1, moire. 2, false colors. 3, etc. However, in reality, we've been using Bayer filter arrays for so long, and its development and adoption is so widespread that the output from sensors that use it are really, really good. And there are other filter arrays other than Bayer and X-Trans, by the way. You also may remember from older cameras, they may use CMY filters, like on a Kodak DCS-720. Now, let's actually talk about Foveon. This is not like traditional sensors. Yes, the underlying technology in the sensor is CMOS, but it actually aims to make an image without any color filter arrays. It aims to sample RGB at each photo site directly. And it does that by taking advantage of the fact that at different wavelengths, through silicon, light will penetrate different depths of silicon. So by taking advantage of that, you can build a 3-layered CMOS that can broadly sample RGB all at once based on the depth of the light hitting the sensor. And this gives you direct measurement and true color information from what you're taking a picture of. There is none or less math required. And by doing so, you again also eliminate the need for any color filter array at all. You don't need to fight moire. You don't need to interpolate the remaining color information. In theory, this gives truer color reproduction, and in theory, it gives better noise performance. That's in theory. The SD Quattro sensor is actually aimed to address some of the issues with the original Foveon sensor design. In this latest variant of the sensor, it is a bit different from the original concept, which is something that that sensor was a bit different. If you look at the Sigma SD1, that featured also a 3-layer sensor, but on that camera, each of those layers were 15 megapixels. Basically, for RGB, they would each have a 15 megapixel layer. The SD Quattro uses a slightly different technique. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the topmost layer is most sensitive to blue, but it's also the most pixel dense, as you may have noticed. It is about 4 times as many pixels as the lower layers. What this means is that these lower layers sacrifice spatial resolution to get bigger pixels, which was done to help improve that noise that I mentioned. And this is also something that Sigma does address, saying that yes, it's a bit of a deviation from the original Foveon design, but they do say that the color accuracy and / color resolution of the new sensor is as good as the older sensors, while having a bit of a resolution bonus, while also being less noisy than the older sensors. So they're kind of making a lot of claims about this newer version of Foveon. And that's it in a big nutshell. Operation and feel. This camera, the SD Quattro, it's big. We'll start off with that. I actually underestimated just how big this thing was. I knew when I bought the camera that it uses the full meat and potatoes SA mount from the DSLR age, from its DSLR brethren. And I knew it was going to be big, but I didn't realize it was going to be this big. Now, that's something that kind of really threw me off guard, since when you look at pictures of this, without any other cameras to give you context, it does look smaller than it is. Part of that, I think, is because of the way that this camera has a bit of a flat top, but let's have a quick look. This, again, this is the SD Quattro. This is the Sony A7 II. The Quattro is basically bigger in every direction. So I gotta line it up with the weird design there. But it is very large. And let's have a look at an actual DSLR. The Quattro, again, is generally bigger or fairly comparable to this Canon 6D, with the main factor here is that the 6D has that prism, making it a little bit taller. Really, the mirrorless move didn't really shrink this. But one pro is that despite this thing having a bit of a quirky look as a result of this thing, it is quite comfortable to hold. Not only that, it feels incredibly solid, and I'm a really big fan of the way this was made. The grip on this camera is very substantial, and I think it would generally suit even some fairly large, meaty hands. And there's a lot of space between the grip and the lens. The only thing that is kind of weird is the way that this camera kind of looks like it has a notch taken out of it, so your palm does kind of dangle a bit. But I still find it very comfortable. To continue to add to the robustness of this camera is also weather sealed, assuming you do pair it with a sealed lens. So that's also something that is nice. Now, one thing you might have definitely 100% noticed is the EVF. It is not where you expect it to be. Have a look. It is here. It's very strange because, one, it's not centered like a more traditional camera design like on the A7 II, and it's not left to make it like a full, nice flat top design. It is really oddly to the right. And it's odd for sure, but it's actually not uncomfortable. I thought it would be, and I admit, the first couple times trying to use this camera, I lifted my camera up to try to align to a viewfinder that didn't exist over here. But you get used to that. And when you do, you find that the offset isn't too bad. Part of this is because the finder is pushed pretty far back behind the body, so you don't actually punch yourself in the face every time you bring the camera up to look through it, like I initially thought I may actually do. But that being said, maybe if you have very, very large hands and you are using this camera, you may self-punch. I'm not sure. Now let's go over the control layout. Generally on the SD Quattro, it's very good. With the body being so big, there are plenty of controls. And it has a 2-command dial layout, which is always nice to see. You have one here, flanking the shutter button, and right there, just above the thumb perch. And overall, I find it a pretty good setup. A nice little touch is that you might have noticed the command dial right above your thumb there has a little bit of a little anti-knock shieldy thing. I don't know that it's actually very useful, but I think it looks kind of cool. Now, I will say that on my copy of this camera, the forward command dial I find is a little too stiff for my liking. This still generally works, but I do admit I have arranged the controls so that the default action of this command dial is flipped with the one in the back, just to make things a little bit more comfortable for me. But otherwise, the layout is fairly reasonable. Additionally, on the top of the camera, you get a lock switch. It's there. I am very confused by this. I actually opened the manual to figure out what was the logic behind it. It doesn't lock the command dials. It doesn't lock the shutter. It actually locks out everything else. And that's a thing, I guess, but why? If anyone out there has an SD Quattro and uses the lock switch, please enlighten me as to why it's useful. I perhaps am just unwashed in the ways of the SD Quattro. All right, now let's actually have a look at the next button on the top deck. You have here a quick set menu button, and it's actually a pretty nice one. You press it and you get a whole bunch of quick set option thingies in the back of the screen. And you can actually modify what you want as your quick set options, which is also pretty good. On the back of the camera, you have a fairly sensible layout. Most of the controls are done with the right hand, as is tradition. And really, the only things you have for your left are around this area. You got your display button there, and you got a EVF rear display toggle thinger, as well as your playback and your delete button. Some of you may have noticed this camera lacks the super fine AF joystick, but it's mostly fine. The camera, after all, only has 9 AF points, and hilariously enough, that's so few that the AF layout is perfectly doable, or using the AF is perfectly doable without the joystick in the control layout. And it's actually pretty funny, because if you look at your button there, the thing to indicate your AF points indicates 9 squares for your 9 points. Kind of a cute little touch. Here's more oddness. The power switch. Can you guess where it is? Is it here? No. Is it there? No. It's here, on the barrel. That's very weird. I'm personally not a fan of this barrel-mounted power switch. Yeah, I kind of get that they might have wanted to put something on that space where the lens mount barrel was just sticking out, but really the power button could have probably gone almost anywhere else. And I think in this case it does actually negatively affect the camera, because this camera already isn't really a battery miser. So having the button all the way, or the toggle all the way here, didn't really encourage me to conserve power. And if it were somewhere around the top deck where my index finger is, I could probably flick this thing on and off and save a bit of juice when I'm not actively shooting. All right, but let's move on to the menu. I like the way that Sigma actually designs the look of their menu system. It's over here, just like, it's nice. I'm not sure why I find it so nice, but I do really, really like it. It is a very simple 3 color coded system. It's got 3 sections split into capture settings in blue, playback in red. Let's see if I can, there we go. And you got camera settings in yellow. It's simple, and again, I really like the look of it. You may have also noticed that there is no mode button, and that's true. There is not one. But you basically have this mode button here, and what you do is you press it with one of your fingies, and ideally you would then scroll through with the command dial on top. I personally don't find this very comfortable. When doing it, that forward command dial is really kind of a bit stiff, and my hands aren't super giant, so there's a bit of stretchage going on in order to do a mode change. On the back of the camera, you obviously have an EVF. It's fairly adequate. And the rear display is also pretty nice as well. Compared to modern EVFs, the dot count isn't crazy high, but it is a very usable EVF. The rear panel itself, being 3 inches and 1.62 millidots, is actually pretty in line with modern panels, and I do really like it. I do wish it tilted, but it doesn't. Now, the real star of this part of the camera is this side panel right here. For me, it really stands out. For a sub display, it's quite good. It's really good for just looking at your camera settings. Sorry, I went to sleep there. And it is a negative display, which is really unique and a nice little touch to help the camera, the sub display, blend into the camera a little better. And I think it does really help with the styling of the camera. Sidebar time. And I know, this video is already very long. But you might have noticed the title of the video. Let me tell you a little story. And it's short, I promise, probably. So I took this camera into my office, as I am to do at my normal actual job. And I do that because normally on my way to work, I walk. So I typically tend to carry a camera so I can maybe grab some shots on the way home or going towards work. Taking some cool snaps, as the kids may say. Early on, when I first got the SD Quattro, I took this camera on my commute in. And I have a boss who also enjoys a spot of photography. So I thought, hey, they might get a kick out of this camera. And hilariously enough, I brought it into their office, and the first words out of their mouth were, "What is that ugly thing?" And they proclaimed the SD Quattro may be one of the ugliest cameras they've ever seen. I disagree. I absolutely love the outlandishness of this design. From the negative display to that odd bottom part of the camera here that just looks like something took a chunk out of it. In short, I think it's a beauty, hence the title, Ugly Beauty. Okay, back to the actual video, camera responsiveness. Because this is also something I thought that we had perfected at this point. But it does come up kind of often when you talk about older Sigma cameras. I don't think that BF has this issue, but the Quattro does. General use of the camera is not terrible. Powering on, navigating the menu, navigating camera stuff tends to be pretty quick. Taking pictures, pretty quick. Where things start to get janky is when you start filling the buffer. When you take a shot with the regular RAW, this can take about 10 seconds to go from buffer to SD card. If you're shooting DNGs, this can be almost 15 seconds. It's not too bad if you're not shooting quickly, but if you fill that buffer, then you have to wait till the buffer fully clears before you can review images. And again, on the DNG setting, that can take up to 2 minutes. And that's 2 minutes where you can't press the playback and review images, which is annoying, but maybe you can treat it like an anti-chimping function. So could be a good thing. I don't personally like it though. The last thing I want to talk about before moving on is that this camera apparently overheats. I personally didn't experience this when I was using the camera because it's winter here up in the Great White North. So pro tip, if you get an SD Quattro, live in a cold place. Problem solved. That being said, here right now, while recording this, I've had this basically on most of the times, and I can feel this camera is getting a little bit warm. Software. I normally don't talk about this, but before we move on, I do really think that we should. Because you kind of gotta use Sigma Photo Pro, kind of. If you shoot DNG, you can probably open the files not using Sigma Photo Pro, and purportedly this apparently works well on the paid photo editors. Your Lightrooms, your Capture Ones, your, I don't know what whatever other ones they have. But I had a heck of a time trying to open the DNGs on non-paid softwares, your Darktables, your Raw Therapies. Typically, DNGs are supposed to be relatively universal, but I found I was having a lot of problems getting it to open or open properly. In the case of Raw Therapy, the most current version, which at the time of writing is 5.12, just wouldn't open the DNG at all. It just crashed. It would double click the image and the program would crash. So I reverted back down to 5.10. And this works. It will open the DNG, kind of. when you open them, you'll see in the preview that things look fine. But then when it tries to render the image, it looks like it's just taxing the SD Quattro. It looks like it's stealing pixels. You'll see in the preview after you try to render it, it will draw black bars on the right of the image and a little bit on the bottom. It's basically stealing your pixels. And it's very weird because you'll see when you initially look at it, it'll give you the regular, what you're expecting for your resolution. And when you double click and it renders, the numbers just kind of shrink a bit and they're just gone. So I did edit the photo as I normally would and then export it, and they're just not there. That part of the image was just truncated for some reason. So in the end, what this meant was that I had to stick to Sigma Photo Pro because I'm cheap and I don't have your Lightrooms. This initially kind of gutted me, and I actually kind of wanted to stop shooting the camera because I did not have a fun time using Sigma Photo Pro. But I powered through. Now, it's not that the program is that bad as a whole, but there are a lot of little things that added up to just frustration. A lot of it did have to do with just how sluggish the software felt. There were other niggles as well, but for me, it was mainly the slowness. It didn't even really crash on me as others have reported, although something did happen, but we'll get to that in a bit. But initially when using it, it would just be very annoying. It's not so slow that you can settle in and just be like, oh, I'm gonna wait, but more like every single action takes just a split second where you end up doubting whether or not you click the thing. So then you click it again, and then you see that the software is then rendering and then rendering again because you clicked twice. So it annoyed me. And like I said, I never had a crash, but I did have a failed save file, and it failed in a spectacular fashion. I tried to save the JPEG or save a JPEG, and I'm going to put it up on screen now. This is what I got. That is weird. At any rate, the program does take getting used to. I do want to point out though that Sigma Germany has a playlist, and it basically goes over how to use Sigma Photo Pro on YouTube, and it's actually very useful. It helped me a lot trying to use the software. And one thing I learned is that for the most part, you can actually address the slowness. So initially I just jumped into the program and went for it. But I got so annoyed, and I really wanted to know if there's anything to do to fix the awfulness, that is the responsiveness of the program. And it turns out, by default, GPU-assisted processing is turned off. That's a mistake, because the Quattro files are big, and I get that they do need a bit of beefy beef to render. And if you have a moderately modern computer, the program kind of actually transforms. A lot of the slowness actually kind of goes away, and it's a lot more responsive. I'm not waiting half a second or second guessing whether or not I click the stupid button. For context, I am doing the vast majority on my on a gaming laptop, which is equipped with a, I think, 12th or 11th gen i7 and a mobile NVIDIA 3070 Ti. So it has power to spare, and turning on the GPU assist is really worth it. Lastly, the Sigma Photo Pro editor is probably the only editor out there to feature a smooth to crispy bar, which that's an awesome bar. That's just cool to have. So kind of neat. Does it make up for everything else about it? Image quality. Right off the bat, yes, the SD Quattro punches above its weight. Well, no. This is a heavy camera. Maybe it punches exactly at its weight. Anyways, what I'm saying is that the image quality is good. That does come with some caveats though, and we'll get some stuff right out of the way, because you can honestly hear this phrase a lot when it comes to the SD Quattro or other Foveon cameras. And can you guess what it is? The phrase is, "It looks like medium format." It's a bit of a weird phrase, but is it true? The SD Quattro absolutely kills it when it comes to micro contrast and overall sharpness, or potential sharpness, when it comes to image rendition. And that makes sense, since the sensor's triple layer thing is doing a really, really good job of being able to capture crazy accurate color reproduction. On top of that, you also have a sensor that has no AA filter. So it's already going to be rendering pretty fine details. And this is especially true when you look at the camera being compared to cameras of the time before it was fully normal to not have an AA filter on top of your sensor. And combine that with the fact that, again, there is no color filter array on top, means that this thing is fairly impervious to color moire, and it's going to be awesome. So you're going to get very nice looking, very sharp looking images. I'm no expert. Obviously, I'm just a dude shouting into the void. But for me, the SD Quattro pixel rendering does actually do things that are a bit better than medium format. So saying it looks like medium format doesn't really do it justice. And don't get me wrong, I love my Aptus 22, my P45, and my Credo 40. But those are fairly normal sensors. They're CCDs with color filter arrays on them. And all three of those backs will moire like no tomorrow under the wrong conditions. That is partly due to the fact that they do have bare color filter arrays on top, and the fact that they don't have AA filters on them as well. The thing that they do have, which does help them with their micro contrast, is the fact that their pixels are huge, which again really helps. But the Foveon has something more, and I think saying it looks like medium format kind of sells the system a bit short, because the medium format systems do suffer from the same artifacts that would be generated from a regular bare centered camera, because that's what they are. Yes, there are ways in which the SD Quattro is a better look. And I get that that phrase is likely just meant to emphasize the micro contrast and the look, that particular look, but it also doesn't capture the entire story, since that they really are only referring to that. And don't forget, this is an APS-C camera, and even compared to the smallest medium format cameras like the Credo 40 or the GFX 50, those sensors are almost 4 times as much surface area as these sensors. So when it comes to the overall look, not just image sharpness or lack of artifacting, it does not look like medium format. The sensor is physically very large, and it does look a bit different. Now, one thing that does make them kind of similar to medium format of old is noise performance. The SD Quattro will go up to ISO 6400, and that is a number. It's not a really good number, not for this camera. Like my Phase 1 camera, after ISO 200, things start to get janky on the SD Quattro. I personally would only maybe shoot up to 400 with it, and I think even then you would need a bit of a helping hand with noise reduction. In fact, even shooting images at ISO 100 and pushing them a bit can elicit some noise. Let's have a look at some of these samples. when it comes to highlight recovery on the SD Quattro, I do think the SD Quattro does have an advantage compared to older medium format cameras. You can typically expect to recover a bit more on these files. So the files are not inflexible, but compared to something like a more modern GFX 50S, the one that I have, it's no contest. The GFX can pull highlights down way better. At any rate, I'll stop referring to the medium format comparison, and we'll get back to a strictly more SD Quattro focused way of phrasing things. Overall, the camera, when used in conditions that are ideal for it, which is plenty of light, produces really amazing images. As is already noted by many other people, the micro contrast and sharpness of the files that it can generate is something that is just amazing. It cannot be too overstated. Even in the era of AA filterless cameras, I think the SD Quattro is something that still stands out compared to regular censored cameras. And I do believe that it is the Foveon sensor at work here. It's not just some other processing thing. And when it comes to playing with colors in Sigma Photo Pro, I actually didn't have any huge issues adjusting colors to my taste. It was, for me, just as simple as any other photo editor playing with the sliders. And even if you do have some issues with the camera's colors straight out of camera, again, pop them over into Sigma Photo Pro, and I think you could work with the files to make them what you think that the Sigma should be producing. Overall, I think that the Sigma SD Quattro's claims of resolution equivalencies aren't total bull shrimp, as they say. In Sigma's own marketing material, they do specifically say that the Foveon sensor, the APS-C one, performs about as well as a 40 megapixel APS-C sensor. And remember, this camera in total across the 3 layers has 30 megapixels, and its spatial resolution is 20. So that is a hell of a claim. But after using this for some time, I'd buy it for $1. I'd buy it for $1, especially with what I'm seeing that's coming out of this camera. But who knows? Maybe if one day I do pick up one of these new Fujis with the actual 40 megapixel conventional sensor, I would be able to compare it. But for now, that's just ideas for another video. Let's move on to autofocus. This is unfortunately, in some ways, worse than the claims that you may have read online about the system. In some ways, it's not that horrible, but in others, it's not good. Let me explain. Again, this camera uses the DSLR/SLR era SA mount. And you'd maybe think, hey, that means I can just use regular SA lenses. And you'd only be half right. Because you only really get full compatibility on this camera if you're using Sigma's SA lenses that are either the art lenses or the contemporary design series lenses. These fully work. But anything else, anything older like the EX series glass will mount, and you can control aperture, but the AF, the autofocus, straight up does not do it. Sometimes it might lock on, sometimes it will lock onto something and then it'll just be totally wrong, but every time it will be super slow. Now, ask me how I know. I wasted money and I bought an older EX series lens. At any rate, if you do have a compatible lens like this 30mm f1.4 DC, then the autofocus is, I think, fine, especially for static objects. The camera is interesting because despite having a hybrid AF system with phase detect and contrast detect, this thing really can't track things. The system is just not capable of doing it. And really, it's, I think, less capable than systems that are decades old. Because at least in the earlier era of DSLRs from the mid 2000s, a lot of the prosumer and higher end cameras would be able to track linear motion reasonably well. This can't do that at all. It tries and it does not. Personally, I don't have an issue with the speed of it in its single shot mode. As I had mentioned, it's overall fine. It's reasonably accurate, it's just not that fast. But I will also preface this by saying that I'm fairly used to the Foveon 645DF, and that is not known for its AF prowess either. But again, for what I like to shoot, I find that the autofocus with a compatible lens is acceptable. And for me, focus and recompose will always be my friend. And again, single shot, generally accurate, if not just a bit leisurely. But as I said, this system, even in the best case scenario, feels like an older DSLR. I do understand when other people review it and they bring it up as a horrible system, because it really is something that is, I think even when this was new, really not very acceptable. Now, the other kicker for this system is, again, hybrid system, and somehow it only has a 9, I don't know why I did that, that's not 9, that's 4. It only has a 9-point AF system. And let's have a look. I don't know if you can see it, it is rendering 9 boxes. And sure, you can change the size of those boxes. You can make them smaller, like they are now. But not having the ability to select points around the frame and being kind of just fixed into those 9 presets feels odd, but all is not lost. If you're actually okay with manual focusing, this camera offers both punch in zoom and focus peaking, which is what I used when I initially had the camera. Because when I bought it, I had not yet bought a lens. So I was using it by adapting manual lenses via M42 mount adapter. And yes, they are still something that you can purchase. I bought mine, I think, off AliExpress, but I think I have actually seen it also on Amazon. Now, when it comes to shooting speed, what can you expect out of this camera? Well, you can expect to fire shots at 3.6 FPS. But remember, fill that buffer, and it's going to be a while before you're able to review your images. But let's actually have a look and listen. Well, listen to a burst of shots. There we go. The sound of the shutter, I'm a bit of a fan. I know it's not hugely chunky, but you do get kind of a deep but muted thunk. I like it. Recommendation and conclusion. I will start by saying no, I don't generally recommend this camera. And honestly, it's not because of the camera itself, because I really like this camera. It's something that I've always wanted, and it lived up to the expectation. But there are a lot of factors to take into account. The availability of the camera, the lens selection, the upfront cost, and the availability of lenses that are available for the camera. This camera really is kind of hampered by those other factors. And let's kind of discuss that. Availability. This camera, I don't think it was that popular when it came out. And it's only kind of recently come back into the view of people interested in weird cameras. And the result is the stock of this camera is generally pretty low. Now, it's not impossibly low like the stock levels of Epson RD1s, but it's not super readily available to buy. You're not likely to be able to walk into your local used camera shop and just see one of these sitting around. And if you do see that, lucky you. Where I do find that there's a relatively constant source to these things is eBay and your Japanese auction site aggregators like Buy. But otherwise, again, I find these are really hard to find in Canada. I've never seen an SD Quattro in store, even when it was something that was a bit of a newer camera at the time that it came out. I've never seen a used one, and until I bought it, I have never seen one of these in person. Another thing to consider is that partly as a result of these things being a bit hard to get nowadays, they're kind of pricey, considering that it's from 2016 and this thing initially wasn't very popular. I'm still kind of surprised that it goes for around 700 USD for one that's used but in reasonable shape, which is great news for those original buyers looking to sell this thing because it really held its value. However, that's not everything, aside from the fact that it's kind of a lot of money for an APS-C camera from that era. But remember when I said that this system in theory has just under 30 fully supported compatible lenses that'll work on it? Well, good luck finding them. Most of the times when you look for used DC or art or contemporary lenses for the SA mount, you'll probably find just the 30mm f1.4, and it's a fantastic lenses, but I seldom see other lenses pop up. Once in a while, I'll see the 50, once in a while, I'll see the 85, once in a while, I'll see the 35, but much, much less frequently than the Canon EF or Nikon variants. And the SD Quattro SA variants tend to be more money than those other lenses. So trying to set up an SD Quattro kit may be challenging. And you might be thinking, fine, I'll just adapt some glass like you did. But remember, the only lenses you can really adapt to this are M42 or things that have a flange distance longer. But there's an issue with that as well. Since again, this wasn't a super popular camera, not a lot of adapters exist for it. But fun fact, you can actually get something other than M42 lenses to work on the SD Quattro. And I did. And you can get these DKL lenses to mount on it. I have a Schneider Zenar. And you can do that by doing DKL to M42 and then M42 to SA. Anyways, all of these factors make this camera really hard to recommend. It only makes sense if you specifically want to try this Foveon system, and this specific one, not the classic one. And if that's the case, then there's a bit more of an argument to buy one. But again, don't forget there are, again, other options if you want to have a Foveon camera. If you don't care about which Foveon, the SD1 exists, and it has better lens compatibility with those older SA lenses. If you do want one of these sensors but don't care about this, you can look at the DP Quattro, and it's got an even funkier body design. Although I think it's actually also more money, so pick and choose. Anyways, it's a bit of a shame Because again, I really like the camera itself, and I wish that the tech caught on a little bit more. It is really cool, and while it does have its pitfalls, it can really deliver excellent images. And I'm really glad to be able to have one. And I expect that I'll be working on more videos comparing the output of this sensor. Although, in this day and age of ultra high resolution modern cameras, I do really think that kind of diminished the need for this sort of thing, given just how far regular color filter array equipped CMOS sensors have become. Again, I'd be seriously interested in seeing how well this stacks up against the 40 megapixel APS-C unit in a Fuji camera. And with that, I know, it'd been a long one. If you're still here, thanks for sticking around. Let me know if you've ever used a Foveon equipped camera. Did you like it? If not, why not? And would you consider an SD Quattro? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe a super thanks if you're into that. Till next time, bye.